Welcome to Let's Talk Para, the podcast where we talk about all things para sport. I'm Yasmina Isa, a para badminton player, and I'm thrilled to bring you inspiring stories from athletes, coaches, researchers, and everyone shaping the para sport movement. If you're passionate about para sport or just hearing about it now, join me each episode as we delve into the world of para sport. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Para. Joining me today is Dan Angus. Dan is a PhD candidate at the Peter Harrison Centre. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you very much for inviting me.
So Dan, could you tell me a bit about how you got into parasport research?
Yeah, so I've got a visual impairment that was from birth. So I have no vision in my left eye and slightly restricted vision in my right. And I guess I've always kind of had an interest in parasport, having come through various pathways in my own sort of personal sporting career. And I guess that drove my research interests. I think that I was very interested in studying the parasport side of things, especially getting to know Professor Vicky Tolfrey and finding an interest in this research area. And I think that kind of drove me on to, look at parasport and particularly para football, as it's an area that I'm very familiar with, but an area that perhaps within the literature is quite underexplored.
Yeah, so obviously you're now doing a PhD, but what was your undergrad in?
So I completed a BSc in Sport and Exercise Science here at Loughborough. I started that in 2017 and finished in 2020 during the pandemic. I then went on to study an MSc actually in exercise physiology between 2020 and 2021. And then before I actually took my PhD, I had a teaching role here. So I was a graduate university teacher in physiology. So I did that between the years 21 and 22. And then began my PhD in the October of 2022, which is more psychophysiology. So both a bit of psychology and then also a bit of physiology there too.
So what is your PhD on?
So I look at two things called challenge and threat, essentially. So what it relates to is the idea that when you experience stress, that you can appraise it in different ways. And in particular, depending on the way that you appraise it, you can either experience a challenge state or you can experience a threat state. And that can have different bearings on perhaps your potential performance outcomes and also the physiological responses that we see within the individual. So I'm exploring that within the areas of football, futsal, which is a five-a-side indoor derivative of football, and also within para football as well.
So you're combining all three, you're combining para and non-para football, basically.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm looking at it from both perspectives, yes.
Do you tend to see differences between your findings in para football and non-para?
If I'm honest, I'm not quite at a point yet where I've sort of done that comparison. I think that's something that would be really interesting to look at because there's some interesting papers that are out there in the literature that suggest the amount of stresses that parafootballers can experience. There's a really good paper by Whittingham and colleagues in 2021 that sort of goes through all of the different organisational stresses that parafootballers can experience. And I think that it would be quite interesting to then have a look at, okay, well, how do they appraise some of the stressful situations that they're involved in? And does that perhaps differ to a mainstream or a non-para population?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm trying to maybe move towards that bit, but not quite there yet.
So what is actually a challenge and a threat? What's the difference between a challenge and a threat then?
So the idea is that when you're confronted with what we call a motivated performance situation, so a situation that's relevant to that individual's goals, they will evaluate the demands of that situation, i.e., do they perceive it as dangerous? Is the outcome quite uncertain to them as an individual? And then they attribute their resources, their perceived resources that they have available to kind of deal with the demands of that stressful situation. So if we look at it from the resource perspective, we've got things like self-efficacy. So that's situation-specific self-confidence. So the confidence they have in that situation. We also then have perceived control, so the amount of control they believe they have. And then we also have a look at the sort of goals that they set themselves. So these achievement goal orientations, that are they looking at it from what we call a mastery approach perspective. So are they setting themselves goals that focus on their individual improvement or the collective team improvement, rather than perhaps trying to avoid not performing better? So trying to avoid, like, we want to avoid those avoidance goals essentially. And depending on I kind of visualize it a little bit as a seesaw. So depending on whether the perceived resources that the individual has can outweigh the demands of that situation, then we're more likely to tip them towards being in a challenge state. Whereas if we tip it the other way, then they're more likely to be in a threat state. Now, just because an individual is in a threat state doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to perform badly. But there was quite a good paper that came out back in sort of 2018 that suggested that I think around 74% of individuals or studies that have showed improvements in sort of challenge states, or individuals experiencing challenge states, they tend to perform better, or there are slight improvements in performance.
Okay, yeah. And were you actually able to test anything out yet, or are you still in the earlier stages?
So at the moment, I've got a study ongoing. We're in the lab at the moment trying to look at how individuals' stress appraisals may influence their ability to make decisions within games, and that's kind of our focus at the moment. And yeah, we've hopefully designed quite a good decision-making task that will allow us to evaluate the decisions that those individuals make and how that might relate to the challenge or threat state that they may be experiencing from that hopefully motivated performance situation that we are providing.
So currently you're at the stage where you've designed the experiment, but you haven't actually done the trials yet.
Yeah, so we're in the process of collecting the data at the moment for that project.
Okay, and
so I'm in the lab at the moment.
Yeah. Where do you hope to see see this research going?
I hope that it's going to provide some use to practitioners to suggest that, okay, there might be this relationship between challenge, threat, and the decisions that an individual might be able to make in certain situations. If an individual is experiencing a challenge state, are they able to make better decisions, or do they make slightly worse decisions if they're in a threat state? And can that then have a bearing on their performance overall as an individual? And then perhaps if that is the case, can we plan effective interventions to try and promote challenge states within individuals, or can we try and intervene a little bit on that appraisal process?
In terms of the group you're getting, are you getting professional footballers in each of the futsal, para football and football, or?
So at the moment we are sort of open to sort of all levels.
Okay.
But the likelihood is that when we run the models, we account for that experience.
Okay.
That makes sense. So when we run our statistics and things like that to look at outcomes, the likelihood is that might be one of the sort of covariates that we add in to see if it does have a bearing. Yes.
Because I think if someone's playing it as a hobby, it's quite different than someone playing it at top
at elite level. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what made you choose this specific topic when you were going to decide your PhD?
So when I actually was interested in the PhD, they asked you to sort of read a paper, and I read this paper and I thought, this is actually a really, really interesting area. I'm going to completely go down this route, and that's the route that I wanted to go down. So that's the route that we've ended up looking at throughout my PhD. And I'm really glad I did, because from my perspective as somebody perhaps with a slightly more physiology background, I've really enjoyed doing the sort of physiological data collection that's involved in these projects. We look at things like heart rate, we look at cardiac output, so the amount of blood that's being pumped around by the heart each minute. We look at vascular resistance, and I've really enjoyed sort of getting those numbers and having a look at those. And then I also really enjoy actually learning a bit more about the psychology. I perhaps, in my undergrad didn't necessarily do that as much, but I've kind of gone back to learning a lot more about the psychology behind it, and I'm kind of enjoying having that sort of new learning experience throughout my PhD that I've had so far.
Fair enough. So obviously you're doing your PhD in football, and that includes para football. So you yourself are a para footballer. So could you tell me a bit about your journey within para football? Because obviously that played a big role or a big contribution into you deciding to get into para football.
Yeah, so when I was about 4, I went and joined my local Sunday league team, and I played for them for a number of years, a good sort of 8 years or so, until I was about 11, 12. And when I got to that point, I went to sort of a local disability sport taster day, and there was a couple of members from sort of the local county, and I got into playing football while I was there, and they said, okay, well, we run these sessions for a county-wide sort of disability football. Would you be interested in coming along? And I said, oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, no, I'd love to come along. So I went along to that, and within a year, the pathway at that point was you kind of moved up to a regional level, and I moved into the regional pathway, which at the time was Centre of Excellences. So the East of England for me was East of England Centre of Excellence. They also became sort of emerging talent centres a little bit later on. But I played for them for a little while, and then ended up sort of in the England development squad for a little bit. And then classification kind of came in, and I was moved away from the England development programme. But I then continued on that para football pathway to still play domestically, and I still play in the Partially Sighted Football League that's played across the country. So I kind of had this, I guess, pathway from sort of youth through to adulthood, and I've really enjoyed sort of even now playing domestically with some really, really talented players that are within the league and that are doing an excellent job at representing their country in partially sighted football, and have had a lot of success over recent years in bringing home some good medals for English para football.
Yeah, so you touched on, you're no longer eligible to play internationally. So what are the categories, categories within para football then?
So para football can take many forms. We have within England, the 6 that are currently played at the FA Disability Cup finals in June or July are, you have the deaf or the hearing impaired, you have the partially sighted, you have the blind, you have the power chair, you have the amputee, and you have the cerebral palsy. So they're all played with different rules, different adaptations to suit those impairments. The deaf, that is 11 aside, probably the most familiar to what listeners will see as Premier League football.
Yeah.
But the referee uses a flag to indicate his decisions, so that the players are aware of when there's stoppages in play. Then you have the cerebral palsy, which from the top of my head is a 7-a-side format of the game. And you have the amputee as well, which is a lesser aside format of the game too. The blind is 5-a-side, played outdoor, which is probably quite familiar to viewers in terms of the Paralympics and watching the Paralympics. That's the blind football that's played at the Paralympics.
Yeah.
Where there is a bell inside the ball so that the players can hear that. So the crowd have to be quite quiet when they're playing. And they also have the sideboards so the play can go off of the boards in different areas. And then the partially sighted format of the game, we actually play futsal. So we play a 5-a-side indoor derivative of football. And that's so that the light intensity is equal across all parts of the court. So for those that have light sensitive eye conditions, then it's equal for them across all areas of the court. And that's played to lines and it's indoor, so 5-a-side.
Yeah. So why did you then not compete internationally?
So for me, it was a case of the international format for partially sighted is B2, B3. And I fall into the B4, B5 categories.
Okay.
So that meant that, okay, I couldn't play internationally, but it meant I can still play domestically because the partially sighted league goes up to B5s.
Okay.
But at the time it was a B2, B3, and it still is for international.
I'm assuming B2, B3 is like the level of your eyesight. Is that what it?
Yeah, so we get classified based off of visual acuity and visual field.
Yeah.
So acuity is more, I guess, your distance, and your field is obviously how far you can see sort of either side of your, you know, for individuals that might have a central vision impairment, or they might have a peripheral vision impairment, they might be classified on field, whereas others might be classified more on acuity.
Yeah. At one point you mentioned something like for this podcast about they combined the partially sighted and the deaf players.
Yeah.
So can you touch a bit on that one?
Yeah, so when I was playing at a youth level for a few years, they combined the partially sighted and the hearing impaired for training sessions. And for me, it was a really interesting experience because we obviously rely a lot on sort of hearing communication and being told where players are and things like that. But if you have an individual who is nonverbal and uses sign to communicate, they rely on us seeing what their signal is for what they want us to do. So it really opened my eyes to look at it from a different perspective in terms of trying to be more aware of what was going on around me on the court and on the pitch. And I think from my perspective, it was a really good experience. And I tried at points to watch the signer that we had at sessions to try and learn, okay, well, what are some of the sign language signals for run from back post, run front post, shoot. And I tried to pick those up to help me communicate with some of the guys that were signing. I probably wasn't the best at it, I'm going to be honest. I probably completely got it wrong at points, but I was trying to make it a better experience for me and for them as well.
Yeah. What do you think like the biggest challenges for para football at the moment in general throughout all the classifications?
It's a great question. I think we're quite lucky in that the actual para football profile is growing quite a lot. We had the IBSA Games here in Birmingham in 2022, and that's done a great job at sort of promoting it from a blind and a partially sighted perspective. But I think that perhaps is the biggest challenge, is trying to, I guess, increase that exposure. And I think that's quite similar in a lot of para sports, is we want that exposure, but not just necessarily at the elite level of just, you know, everyone just tuning in for the Paralympics, but are there other opportunities where individuals can watch para sport and watch it across a range of levels, so that people know that there are opportunities for them to get involved. And I think the FA have done a great job with that in terms of having the FA Disability Cup now broadcast and the finals for that. So that shows you that there is, clear interest in the domestic side of the game as well as the international side of the game. So I think that's quite nice to have. And I think, it's that increased exposure, I think, is maybe the target.
Yeah. Do you see the other, because obviously in the Paralympics it's only blind football that's in the Paralympics. Do you see the other categories making it to the Paralympics?
I'd love to see it. I don't know necessarily if it will happen. I mean, cerebral palsy football was in, and now it was taken out. I think that was taken out post Rio. Okay. But it was definitely in London 2012 because I went to watch it. And I watched Team GB there. I also watched some of the blind football as well. I'd love to see it. I don't necessarily know if it's going to happen. But maybe if cerebral palsy was in it before, then perhaps it could make a comeback. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now here's an interesting one. Do you see, because you still play para football? Do you see any correlation, like when you're playing it now? Do you think about your PhD as you're playing
it? Do you know what? When I go into a big game, sometimes I do.
What, like you're thinking, am I in a challenge or a threat?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent. So challenge and threat can be also subconscious. So sometimes we some of those processes are a little bit subconscious, so we don't necessarily know we're doing them. But sometimes I think to myself, okay, well, right, what's my goal here? have I set myself the right goal for this game?
Yeah.
And have I, looked at the amount of confidence I've got in the situation or something like that? Yeah, I've probably gone into a few games and perhaps used some techniques like self-talk and some imagery stuff to try and get myself into the right space. And yeah, definitely some correlation there.
Because obviously I know when you do your actual trials, you're going to be doing like blood tests and stuff, which you obviously can't do in the middle of a game for you at the moment. But it would be interesting to see like how, because when you're so invested, because your PhD, you get really invested in it for a few years. So it'd be interesting to see like how, if you're constantly thinking about it while you're playing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the good thing about stress appraisals is it's a constantly evolving process, right? Your appraisal at one point in time can heavily differ to your appraisal at another point in time because of the changes in the environment around you and the information that you have available. So even within games, those appraisals can change, and the difficulty obviously is then trying to capture those, because you can't just randomly stop a game, ask somebody to fill in a questionnaire, right?
Yeah.
Or be like, excuse me, can I just attach this finger cuff to you? I just need to have a look at your cardiac output and your vascular resistance, please.
Yeah.
So I think we're constantly, I guess, aware. I think you ask any sort of PhD student who perhaps does something in perhaps in psych, they're probably, when they perform, they're probably applying maybe something related to their PhD.
Yeah.
It's not something I've, I guess, come to review, but now you kind of mention it, then I probably do it a lot.
So I planted the seed in your head now.
Yeah, no. So I've got a tournament next weekend, and I know for a fact now I'm probably going to think about it as soon as I'm sort of sat on the train going up to it.
I'm in a threat mode right now.
Yeah.
I'm in a threat mode.
God forbid. I hope I'm in a challenge state, to be honest.
Yeah. But yeah. So I think, with para football, like obviously it's growing a lot now. Do you see it growing a lot around the world, or just like in England? Like how? Because in fairness, I've never actually watched para football, so I don't know how popular it is around the world.
I think it's definitely growing around the world as well. What was amazing was recently the England amputee women's team, they went out to South America and played in a tournament out in South America for the first time, and they did an excellent job out there. So not only are we seeing more worldwide promotion of the game, but also promotion of the game from a female perspective, which is great to see.
Yeah.
We've also got a female B1 blind squad now at the FA as well, which is absolutely fantastic, and they did an amazing job in Birmingham in 2022 at the IBSA Games, and they're continuing to develop really, really well. So I think it's growing worldwide, and it's also growing from a female perspective as well, which is great. Yeah.
And it's interesting you said that, because my follow-up question was going to be, are a lot of females actually playing it now? Because the snippets I tended to see were predominantly men in the past, but from what I gathered, females are now joining in the world of para football.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, when I link back to that idea of that increased exposure that I was mentioning within para football, it's now also ensuring that increased exposure is for the female game as well.
Yeah.
And making sure that there's initiatives there within para football to promote those formats. But yeah, it's great to see sort of more female involvement and some youth players coming through into those performance environments too.
Yeah. So throughout, you mentioned briefly you have a tournament next week. So what would you say is your biggest, like the proudest moment you have within para football?
I think for me it was lifting my first FA Disability Cup. That was a couple of years ago. A really, really great game against Merseyside Blind and VIFC, who are a really well-run club. We had it was my first experience of winning sort of a big trophy in our sport, and I thought at that point, I had my family there watching, and I had some friends sort of watching on telly, and I thought at that point, this is great. This is the sort of feeling that I want to keep on having, and I think that was probably the proudest moment for me. And I think it was also great because it was something that I could enjoy with my teammates and guys that have also come through those pathways and now sort of hit the pinnacle of the domestic game, and for some of those guys who have also hit the pinnacle of the international game as well.
Yeah. Would you said first, so you won multiple trophies then, or was that?
Yeah, so we've won 2.
Okay.
Yeah,
fair enough.
so I've won 2 in a row at the moment with my team, and we're hoping we can qualify and go for a third. But yeah, I mean, I had the experience the first time around of obviously losing that cup final, so I think that made it, when I won it the first time, perhaps that little bit better, because I'd sort of tasted being so close but not quite making it. So yeah, it was maybe a little bit of relief as well when I came around to winning it for the first time.
What club do you play for?
So I play for a team called Scorpions Futsal Club within the Partially Sighted Football League.
Where is that based?
So the team, I think, is actually registered in Blackpool, but what you'll find with a lot of the Partially Sighted Football League is that players play for teams that aren't necessarily affiliated with where they're actually from, because it's all played at central venues.
Oh, okay.
So, for example, the tournament that we had more recently was in Liverpool. The next one's in Manchester. We have them in Nottingham, in Hartpury, in Hereford, wherever we might have to go for them. So we get to travel around the country a fair bit doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's mostly centralised venues. So quite a lot of the guys that play, they will have sort of non-para sides that they'll also play for at the same time. So some of the guys are playing, I guess, at a really good level of futsal for clubs like Bolton and Bolton Development and things like that. Some of the England guys, I think some of them are at Sporting Southend, and some are at Braintree and places like that.
Yeah. Do you see have you ever played like non-disabled, and do you see that the integration is quite easy within it?
Yeah, I think so. I think what's quite nice is because the rules are very, very similar. We only have a couple of adaptations to the futsal rules for partially sighted, and that mainly surrounds the goalkeeper.
Yeah.
So if you're an outfield player, it doesn't necessarily affect you as much. Primarily, the rule is if you have a fully sighted goalkeeper in goal, they can't leave their D, so they can't leave their penalty area. And that when they throw the ball has to bounce before halfway. And then those are the only 2 really sort of big adaptations that we have.
Yeah.
So I guess sometimes, when you're playing the non-para format and the keeper sort of throws long into the attacking half, I think once or twice I probably turned around and appealed for it because I thought it was an indirect free kick on halfway because the ball hasn't bounced.
Yeah.
And then they can also leave their penalty area at the same time, so they can use the fly rule, which you can in partially sighted as well, but only when your team's losing, and you obviously have to substitute the fully sighted goalkeeper for a partially sighted player.
Yeah.
So that all outfield players would be partially sighted.
Yeah. So in general, though, like integration is quite easy with that one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for our format, yeah, absolutely.
And for you guys, like you don't tend to train together, but it's you come together for the match, and then.
Yeah. So we'll train separately, but when we come together, we have certain tactics that we'll use as a team. So we'll have certain set pieces that we like to use as that group of players, certain rotations that we might want to employ, and those, you're aware of those for that team. But it's trying not to get confused again with what the rotations and the set pieces are for your non-para side as well.
Yeah.
So it's trying to manage that a little bit, but it's good fun.
Fair enough. All right. What kind of advice would you give to someone who is slightly visually impaired? What kind of advice would you give them, or partially sighted, if they wanted to get, whether that be research or sport?
So I'll start with the sport first. I think my advice would be to just try and get involved wherever you possibly can. I know at first that might seem perhaps a little bit daunting, especially if that's from a non-para perspective. But if that club are able to make any adaptations that you might require, then absolutely try and get involved. And I think have a look at the FA web pages. There's some great stuff on those to highlight to you where there's some clubs available and how to get involved from sort of a youth perspective and get involved in some of the, I believe they're called something like the Emerging Talent Days or something like that, or Para Talent Days, that individuals can go to and then try and get involved in the para pathways for each of the respective impairments, and try and work their way up through those pathways. So that would be my bit of advice from a sporting perspective. From a research perspective, I'd say absolutely try and get involved in research if it's something that you're really interested in doing. I don't think any university will ever hold you back from wanting to try and do some research for them. I think if the university is able again to make any sort of necessary adaptations that you might require as an individual, be that adapted sort of laptops and things to allow you to be able to read sort of papers, and additional sort of library loans if it's going to take you longer perhaps to read a book that you might need to read, then they can put those in place and you can get involved in trying to conduct some research. Absolutely. Correct
me if I'm wrong, but like within the field of parasport, there's still so much to uncover, but within BI or like partially sighted specifically, there's still there's still a vast that's a vast field that's yet to be uncovered, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot more that we can do within sort of partially sighted or visually impaired sport. Yeah. I think that we're doing a good job at perhaps growing some stuff around the spinal cord injury stuff, but there's obviously still a long way to go with that, and cerebral palsy as well, and all, like every impairment really. I think there's a long way to go with research, but I think we are starting to make a good start with it really, and some good progress. But I'd love to see some more research in sort of visually impaired. Absolutely. Yeah, hopefully in the next few years, who knows, maybe your paper could make it big and then everyone decides to get it. You never know. You never know. All right, for the last part of today, I've told you to prepare 2 truths and a lie. Well, told you right before this to prepare 2 truths and a lie. Mm-hmm. So I will try to guess what they are. So could you please tell me your 3 statements? Okay, so statement number 1 is I am a massive fan of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. Statement number 2 is that when I was a teenager, I was a qualified boccia referee. And statement number 3 is that I'm half German. I'd say you're half German. I'd say that's true. I feel like Angus gives off a German vibe. I don't know why. I could be completely wrong. No, but maybe that gives off a German vibe. I'd say you despise the team. You said Tottenham, didn't you? Yeah. I'd say you despise that team. So I'd say that is the lie. Okay. So I'm actually a massive Tottenham Hotspur fan. They are my love. I love Tottenham Hotspur. Although at the moment they're not necessarily performing brilliantly, but I will love them nonetheless. Fair enough. I was a qualified boccia referee when I was a teenager. What, you're not German? I'm not German. No. So the Angus surname is Scottish. Oh. But it's some Scottish roots that I must have somewhere down the line in my family. Where are you from? But I'm just English mother, English father. Oh, fair enough. No German in me whatsoever. Yeah, that was, yeah. Well, at least I didn't get it right, but it's all right. At least I got the you're a qualified boccia. Yes, yeah. I got that right, so I'll take that. But yeah, Dan, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you ever so much for having me. And yeah, hopefully, I don't know when you graduate from your PhD, but we get to see the published papers soon. Yeah, hopefully. Fingers crossed anyway in the next sort of year or so. Yeah, exciting. But good luck with all your research and with your tournament next weekend. Amazing. Thank you ever so much. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening.